Good morning, everyone. Well, as you just heard, we're going to have a conversation about putting the equity in tech, cultivating the equity in tech, equipping all of our children, speaking on a humanity-wide scale, to survive and thrive in this world that grown-ups have created for them. I thought we might start with a little multiple-choice question to help us define the problems we're talking about this hour. When we're talking about inequality in tech, are we talking about A, unequal access to the internet, B, unequal access to the internet at home, and here we're thinking about kids in particular, C, access to technology that makes our lives better as opposed to worse, D, access to employment in Silicon Valley, or E, all of the above? Who would like to take this one on?
I think it's all the above. Like it's
Yeah.
that's a good kind of description of the landscape today. Through the work that we are doing at Common Sense, and especially what I'm doing with Common Sense Latino, we are constantly in contact with families that today in 2019 don't have an email, don't have, they don't even think about, paying for a broadband access at home because it's totally out of their budget.
If mom and dad have a cell phone at home,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that Junior is prepared to do homework assigned by a teacher that really requires a laptop or a desktop, something like that.
Exactly. Through our work in the schools, we also see, there is a lot of struggle and problems because the students are getting assignments that they need to go to Target or McDonald's, to get access to a Wi-Fi and do their homework in their mobile devices because they don't have a laptop to do it. And then, I also think there is a major problem here in the Silicon Valley because there is a obvious, huge lack of people of color who will be really needed to change what's happening, what kind of products are being created, and what kind of different perspectives are just being discussed in all these meetings that happen here. That needs to change.
Anyone else want to join in?
Yeah, I think thanks to Common Sense's census data and also our local data that we conducted in partnership with Joan Gans Cooney Center in New America, we found that yes, there is near universal access to a tech device here in Silicon Valley and across the country. But when you take a look at the environments and the quality of the environments in which those tech devices are used, that's where there is a big divide. And so just for example, when you take a look at the challenges that impact those quality of tech environments, you see that those challenges become much more pronounced in Hispanic families, households with lower income, with educators that are serving kids in more kids with federal subsidy. And also, even here in Silicon Valley, compared in San Francisco County when compared to San Mateo and Santa Clara County. And so what are some of those tech challenges that we see is that we see lack of slow internet service, the cell service is cut off, multiple people using the same devices, a lack of alignment between the device that you have and the needs of the software that you're trying to use. Just an example of here, the educators, 34% of educators who are serving a majority of federal kids on federal subsidy said that they had broken hardware. When you compare that to 16% of educators that are serving a minority of kids on federal subsidy. 1 in 2 families here in San Francisco County and 1 in 2 Hispanic families here in the region report that the use of that their home tech challenges actually make it harder for their child to keep up with their peers at school.
It's a hardware problem, but it's also a software problem. I think even well-educated, well-resourced parents complain that they don't know how to navigate the digital world with intelligence. How are they expected to do it for their kids? That's got to be magnified 1,000-fold when you're talking about parents who don't live in a digital world most of their lives. And then they come home after working 2 or 3 jobs and there's, there are questions they can't answer or even begin to think about how to answer.
We did some research with Stanford, the School of Education, sponsored by the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and found that we had close to 100,000 residents in San Jose. That's nearly 10% of our city that don't have broadband access at home. And it's over half our low-income population. So it's a massive issue. 60% of those low-income families say they can't even afford the $10 a month low-cost plans. So when you have over 70% of homework requiring online access, you're just basically locking whole populations out of opportunity. And when we have here in the Valley about 5% of Silicon Valley executives who are Latino, yet in San Jose we have 34% of our population is Latino, you have a real pipeline problem. And when Tristan was talking about, the people who are most affected are the furthest away from power, I mean, it starts with access. And, certainly we need to figure out how to make sure technology is enhancing human potential, not restricting it. But if you don't have basic access, then you're completely locked out altogether.
So I'd like to focus on the idea that this is actually a collective responsibility for all of us to address these questions. And we can sort of look at it, there's parental, there's educators, there's government on all the local, state, federal levels, maybe international levels, I don't know. And of course, investor influence is a huge issue. But why don't you start with government? What can the city of San Jose do to address this fact that there are so many people who are just locked out of the present, let alone the future?
So we, what we've found is we're here in Silicon Valley, we're the largest city, and in our work we're often dealing with these tech issues at the forefront and are, in fact, informing our national policymakers because we see that there's a big gap in understanding. And so one of our big initiatives is we have entered into a series of large telecom agreements with AT&T, Verizon, several other companies to invest in 5G for San Jose. So we'll be the largest 5G deployment in the country. And what we've done is repurpose all of the new revenue that's coming into the city to a digital inclusion fund. And so our goal is to connect 50,000 households in the next 10 years to internet, to broadband at home, as well as improve digital skills for the same number of households. So we are literally the first city in the country to pledge to close the digital divide, and we think it's essential, and we really should be the first place to do that and show the rest of the country how to do it.
And am I right in thinking that these very same companies have publicly groused about the deal that San Jose cut with them and hoping not to be required, not to have an elbow put in their back to do the same thing for other cities around?
There is a well-documented national policy debate about our approach. And the Digital Inclusion Fund, I think, is really a way to solve, it is to bridge the gap in access. But we are on different sides of the fence in terms of how we approach the digital divide.
Kim-Mai, I'd love for you to talk about what investors at any stage of funding or shareholders can do to press companies, whether they're tech companies or telecom companies, to behave better.
So I think I wanted to jump on something that Shireen said earlier when you were saying it was a pipeline problem. And one thing that I try to do in my role is someone who grew up in the Bay Area, who's third generation here, was born not far from here, has seen the industry change over multiple decades, and then worked as a journalist for 10 years, and then is now in the capacity of working at a firm as an investor. Is like I actually try to stress that it's not a pipeline problem, and that we all have to. When I see other venture investors say, well, it's a pipeline problem, it's often that language is a way of absolving themselves of the responsibility to take some effort on the issue of like equity inclusion in their own firms. So I would say from an investor standpoint, when I've surveyed the landscape of lots of different firms of how they try to improve themselves and their own processes on this, it comes down to having a lot of political will inside the firm from all different stakeholders, including the highest decision makers. It requires tracking and collecting information at different stages in every process that you run, from sourcing to events to who you present in your public media. And, we as a firm, it's something we value and we talk about, consistently. It's something that we, regularly have updates on within our own firm. And it comes from all of these different steps. And I would say at a higher level, things that we've tried to do as a fund, we try to support a lot of founders that are doing work to expand access. For example, like a recent deal that we did in the last year was we invested in a young woman named Sheena Allen, who runs a company called Capway that is expanding financial access to the underbanked. She grew up in a rural part of Mississippi and now runs her company out of Atlanta. Another company that we invested in the Bay Area is Landed from Jonathan Asmus and Alex Lofton, and they are helping teachers access homeownership throughout California and a number of other metros by helping with down payment assistance. And so it comes from there are the mechanical parts of looking at your process and studying every step of it, and then there are also the parts of embodying that within the values and the culture of your own team and actually having leadership that actively engages and talks about these issues publicly in both local and national media.
We heard earlier from Tristan and Ellen that if the company is structurally designed in such a way as to make its money off of, scooping the data out of our lizard brains to create zombies. We're mixing metaphors here. But, that it just, you're never going to get anything more than a paper-thin commitment to diversity and inclusion. Do you think that's the case? Is the best way to sort of attack it from the outside? From people who are creating startups to address these issues?
As someone who's looked at changing systems before, with both inside and out, you need an inside and outside game, and it's smart to have both and run to both at the same time. So one thing that I would stress is the particular generation of companies that Tristan talks about, we actually don't see a lot of consumer internet advertising-based deals anymore, and we haven't seen a lot, frankly, in a long time. Most of the deals that we do are enterprise and SaaS, and if it's a consumer deal, it's often e-commerce based, and that's because a couple of companies have really consolidated a lot of power and influence over advertising-based consumer business models, and it's actually hard for lots of other companies to compete with them. So we don't actually see many deals that speak to that particular set of incentives anymore. But I would say, one thing that is underrated and not understood a lot by the advocacy community is that when venture firms, there's a whole kind of chain, right? So company raises money from investors. Investors also raise money from other institutions. They also raise money from university endowments. They raise money from charitable foundations. They raise money from public pension funds. And I think that's actually a really underrated lever of influence and power, which is to go back and ask, what are your university endowments? Are they invested in diverse managers? Are the charitable foundations that are funding your nonprofits, are they invested in diverse managers? And I, from an investor standpoint, one of the things that was surprising about crossing over from the media world into the venture world was you see a lot of pressure from journalists to diversify the investors in your team or diversify the type of founders that you're backing, but we don't actually see a lot of pressure from our investors who are actually affiliated with mission-based institutions to tell us the people who are actually giving us capital or investing capital into us never ask those questions. It's usually media and journalists. And so, that's something that I would encourage you to kind of think about and take back with you, is if you are working with large-scale institutional funds, ask them.
Michelle, can you talk about the inside-outside game at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation?
I'm not quite sure I understand specifically that question, but I think in terms of funders in funding access to technological devices in schools and communities, some things to think about as a funder is that a lot of funders who are in an effort to try to level the playing field might say, I want to provide a tablet or a laptop to every single child in this classroom or in this school, which, of course, schools are going to take them up on that offer, and then teachers are going to take advantage of that situation and be able to assign homework that they thought that they never would have been able to assign before. But I think what funders need to realize is that the child that's in that classroom is going home to those home environments that, like Maria was saying, was that maybe they don't have Wi-Fi, and so they are using the precious cell data limits, their family's precious cell data limits, using their phone as a hotspot. Or maybe if they live on the coast and they're living, they have to go to the Family Resource Center parking lot to access their Wi-Fi, and they're sitting in their parking lot doing their schoolwork. And libraries are great too. They're great resources for families and for kids, and they provide hotspots that you can even check out, but oftentimes those hotspots are checked out. Or what if the child has a parent that is working 2 or 3 jobs? Who's going to take that 10, 11, or 12-year-old to the library so that they could do their homework? So these are the kinds of things that we need to think as funders, is that in our desire to try to level the playing field, we're maybe not actually doing just that.
Maria, can you speak to that as well?
Of course. I think that Michelle and I have been working together for the last 18 months or so in a specific project for families with kids 0 to 8. And everything that we put together in that new media guide is all through the equity lenses. So we're thinking about English language learners, families. We were thinking about those families that don't have Wi-Fi at home. So I think that there is a strong commitment that we have a common sense through the work that we do. It's Common Sense Latino, it's Common Sense Media, education. All of our efforts are really focused on being really thoughtful in all the programs and the content that we're creating, and how also we talk to those families, because I think that's also very important. We really need to...
And how so?
Yeah, let me just talk about Latino, because that's the program that I'm leading. When we decided to launch a Latino a couple, 4 years ago, we decided as an organization that we wanted to go way beyond just the language and check, Spanish language content, that's it. So we said we wanted to really embrace this community. We really want them to know that we appreciate who they are. We are targeting the Spanish language, the Spanish-speaking community, which is the immigrants and first generation. And we have seen that is resonating, when you respect people's culture. And I think this could apply to other minority groups. It's just going beyond the language and paying attention to their needs. I think there is an increasing number of research reports that are indicating how Latinx families are using media and technology in a different way. In our own research, the Common Sense Census in 2016, we found out that Latino families and parents are 2 to 3 times more concerned about media and technology than other families, which, we didn't ask why, but my interpretation is there is a strong cultural component there, especially for the Spanish-speaking segment of the community. But we also see there are other reports that are really inspiring and show that these families are willing to use technology together. They co-view. The kids are helping the parents who are not that tech savvy. And that is also, it's a good thing. So there are, really good, there are challenges, but also good things that we need to take in consideration. And that's exactly what we are doing through the work that we're developing through Common Sense Latino.
So how does that play out when, as so often happens today, we struggle with misinformation, with false information, with conspiracy theories? You go to YouTube, as so many children do, to find out the answers to the most basic questions, scientific questions, perhaps about vaccines. And you have a system, a playing field, the table is tilted towards misinformation. How do children navigate that if parents are proving to be troubled doing so?
We have actually, our digital citizenship curriculum is being updated now. We're really proud of that. And we have included a module about fake news and how to help kids understand, the sources of information in these very complicated times. I think that that's a component, but I also believe there is a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of help the parents, and that's where we combine the other part. We're helping the students and the educators in the school sites, and then with the other piece of the work, supporting families to empower them, which is not easy. I'm speaking again for the Latino community in these times, very challenging for all of us. Empowering families to, just think twice before you believe what you find in social media platforms or what you find online. I think it needs to be like an ongoing sort of support and just creating content to help them understand better.
I don't know who else on the panel here is a parent, but do any of you want to jump in about how you've tackled that at home?
Well, I mean, I think we, as part of the study, we held a number of community conversations with parents and educators and librarians on the use of technology with young kids, and parents are thoroughly confused. I am a parent myself, and I am thoroughly confused. After a presentation like this morning, I'm like, I don't want to touch tech ever again, right? But I think, they are confused, but they also recognize that technology is here to stay. And technology is this basic necessity that they're seeing it much like they see electricity. And they're making these struggles, they have this struggle of how do they use technology in the most appropriate way. And I think that's what the guide that we created with Common Sense Media is meant to do, is really to recognize the real day-to-day struggles that families are facing. And recognize and understand that they are trying to make their best choices that they can to improve their child's educational outcomes in light of those struggles. And so that's kind of what our guide is we hope it does, that it provides these valuable tips and ideas for families so that that are living in this highly digital world.
Shireen?
We found in our research that parents were, especially in Latino families, were very fearful of the technology for themselves because they're worried about fraud and issues around security, and then for their children around predators and other negative influences. And so one of the programs that we have in San Jose is called School to Home, and we go in and work with a group called the California Emerging Technology Fund, and they actually go into middle schools and they do programs with both parents and children together to educate parents on safe use of the technology, as well as there's substantial benefits to them being online in terms of services that they can get. And so it's really important, as we push forward, that we have those kinds of programs available. And the other piece about this area is that there isn't really consistent metrics across the board to show progress, and the data around digital access and use, like the FCC 477 data is deeply flawed. It is, the way they count broadband connections is if you have one person in the census tract connected, that entire tract is considered connected. And so we really have a lot of misinformation about who's connected, who's not, how are they using technology, who's left out. This is a huge issue for the census count that's coming up, which is going to be predominantly online. And it's an issue in places like, big cities where who's left out is really just a hidden population, and it's significant, yet it's hidden because the data's not good. And so as policymakers, I think we really are emphasizing and advocating for to the FCC and others that we need to change how we count people, and then how do we measure outcomes, because there's a ton of coding camps and small programs, ad hoc things that are happening all over the valley, but are we making a dent here? Do we know? There aren't clear metrics, and so part of our Digital Inclusion Fund is we want everyone to get on the same set of metrics so we can measure progress over time.
Kim-Mai?
So as a fund, we haven't, as I said, we haven't really invested in a lot of, there's not really a public investment out there that's related to the subject of information literacy right now, so I don't really know if I have a ton to say on this subject. Other than, I worked as a journalist before, so if I had a kid, I would, the question that I would ask is how do you know what you know? And to be persistently asked that through the process of surfing through information online.
I talk to quite a number of adults now in my social circle and beyond who say, oh, well, I've unplugged. I'm no longer on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, but I'm not on Facebook. Or they really have tried to divorce themselves from social media. And I guess the problem I see with that approach is you haven't divorced yourself from the broader world that is acting upon you and acting upon your friends and acting upon your fellow citizens and voters, whether or not you think you're engaged with it. Certainly we'll see with the rollout of 5G and the increase of the smart home and appliances talking to each other, regardless of whether they're talking to you. that this technology is encroaching on our lives. There's a way in which perhaps we need to ask adults to take a stronger sense of communal responsibility for staying on top of what's going on. I don't know, that sounds more like a statement than a I see here that we've got about 10 minutes, and maybe I let go of the question asking and allow you guys to do it. I see a hand going up over there in the orange blouse. We do have 4 people with microphones wandering around, so think about that as she asks the first question. There we go.
Hi, thank you. This has been really interesting. I'm a newly credentialed teacher. I substitute teach in Pleasanton, but I've been 11 years at Pleasanton Public Library. So I've seen both sides of the equity equation. And Pleasanton has a one-to-one technology goal. And so they provide laptops to every student who says that they need it. They'll loan it for the year, which is great. And our library is pretty close to where I teach, so I know that our library not only serves the students, but it serves so many adults who really need that technology. And as librarians, we just keep helping the adults who are fairly familiar with technology, but still need that teaching. And we're not really trained other than what we already know, but we have, as library, we have to provide so much money for people to use this technology to print their documents. I have so many patrons that say, well, I've got a printer at home, but it's broken, or I can't afford the ink, so I'm just here to print, And we have 12 laptops in a kiosk, and that's not even enough. So, some of the things that you could, companies can do to help this problem is to maybe make a grant to your local library, wherever your business is, saying that, I'd like you to add another kiosk of laptops because people really need them. For the public schools, every 2 or 3 years, their Chromebooks are out of date. And so the one-to-one won't work unless they can buy a new set. So things like that would really, really help.
Sounds like a comment we should let stand. Anybody else have a question as we move on? There in the back.
Hi, everyone. So I am a special education teacher in a predominantly Title I district, about 3 hours in traffic from here. So that being said, I had a couple comments that are kind of inquiries about opinions. One is that came from the Digital Inclusion Fund and the Emerging Tech Fund. You had mentioned that progress, that you're monitoring progress. My first question is, how is that measured? Like, what are
So I can start. So the fund is just launching this year. So we did this study with Stanford that goes through, we interviewed over 600 low-income families along, 30 dimensions of digital access and use. And so what we'll do is we'll update that study in a comprehensive way at the 5-year mark, and then we are actually working with our public library to develop consistent learning metrics for all of the grants across this portfolio. And so those will be coming out in the next couple months, so they're not complete yet, but we are working with folks who have deep expertise in learning and education. And then on the point on the laptops and one-to-one, I do think that is a huge issue. And the fact that we are in Silicon Valley and have all these companies that have so many laptops going through the system, yet kids in our schools don't always have laptops that work. And I think it's great that you're in a school that has one-to-one, but not all schools in San Jose, for example, have a one-to-one program. And so you've got these ambitious sort of goals around digital literacy, but then they literally don't have the laptop. So I think it's really essential. And the fact that parents are using those tools for their own needs is not surprising. And I think that's, again, an issue of hidden need. And shining a light through events like this is really essential.
Anybody else want to address it?
Yes, I'd like to just add a comment on the challenge with the undocumented families. I think that's an issue that many school districts are facing. What we have learned through the work that we are doing with the undocumented segment in the Latino community is that, it takes a lot of time, and it usually works when you build a really good relationship with trusted messengers within that community in your school. Say that you identify a few parent leaders that, tend to be like really outspoken, and, they do their best to be involved in schools. Usually those are the parents that will help you share the message with the rest of the families to help them understand that this is not, it's meant to help them, and that information is not going to be shared with the authorities. Just try to be in their place. They are scared to death, and there are many reasons to be scared, these days. So I would suggest that you try to reach out to those parents that are leaders in that community. That should help.
Thank you. At the beginning and the end of the day, it's about person-to-person communication instead of the phone. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Anybody over there? Yeah?
Thank you very much. I work in the education department at the Hewlett Foundation, and we receive many requests from just local high schools and local schools here in our neck of the woods, like the Sequoia High School, which is located in Redwood City. So my question is, what can we do to solve this problem about these families that they don't have internet at home? How about offering the Chromebooks, but offering additional funding so the librarians at the schools can stay additional hours, so the kids can just go to the local library in their school and use these Chromebooks. I just wanted to point that perhaps would be a good idea to sponsor that, because I understand that all these low-income families that they don't have the internet at home, and the transportation to the local library can be an issue as well. So how about that as a solution? Thank you so much.
So I think libraries are a really critical piece of the puzzle. But what we hear, and I'd love to hear from the experts on the panel, is that not having access at home is a humongous inhibitor. And so what we hear is, how do we get that access so kids can do their homework at home? And so we partnered, for example, with the Eastside Union High School District to, they brought a public bond and worked with the city to actually put up a free Wi-Fi network for the community outside the school. And so that has made a huge difference so far, but we're still experimenting with different models. But ultimately, we need to stop thinking about internet access as a luxury item, which we still do, and technically it is, and from a policy perspective, and start thinking about it as essential for learning tools for children.
Yeah. I agree. I think that access at home is essential, but there is also one piece that I think we haven't mentioned today, and it's happening that school districts are receiving all these Chromebooks, and oh yes, give one Chromebook per student, but that is not the whole solution. We also need to think about all the media literacy skills that those students need in order to really take advantage of those devices, the Chromebooks, right? And the same with the families. We we have heard countless stories from Latino families when their kids get a home with a Chromebook, if they're allowed to bring it home. The parents are so scared that they will break the Chrome that they don't let the students use it. So that happens. And they, all that, I think, education process needs to happen at school, needs to happen with the families as well, for them to understand how important is that Chromebook for the kids to really do better at school and, do their homework and their assignments. And I think, we have seen also through the work with the Latino community how education is a top value, especially for immigrant families. They do know that, and, lately we have seen a lot of stories in these last couple of weeks from kids that their parents are farm workers, and they have been really excited, to share they are the first college graduate in their family. So I think that all that needs to be taken in consideration as well, the media literacy piece, and very important to understand that it needs to be a really comprehensive effort. It's the students, the school districts, and also the families, all of them, and that's part of what we do.
There's an interconnected ecosystem.
Yes.
Yeah. So am I seeing right that we have time for one more question? Oh, gosh. Which to pick? I think you, yes.
I grabbed the microphone. No, actually, I have a question. Well, listening to this, it has raised my awareness of this concern about the lack of technology equity. Do you believe that lack of technology can be driving the gap between the haves and the have-nots in this country, and even possibly creating like a permanent underclass if people are never able to surmount that, divide between, if your teachers are insisting that you do something online and you're not able to, so now you're just left behind. Is that it seems to be a concern. How could that be surmounted? And I think back to a professor I had who refused to give any additional points for the presentation of, say, a paper. It was the content that mattered. It seems like we kind of lost track of content over, our substance over style with technology. So is technology helping or hurting the underclass in this country, I guess, is my question.
It's a pretty big question to answer at the end of this conversation.
I think that is helping in some ways. There are, I think, many great positive aspects of technology when we see how families are just being able to make phone calls and have video conference for free. And for a low-income family, that means a lot. And it used to be a huge, part of their budget, 10, 20 years ago. It's not a problem now. So that is a good thing. But in terms of the school, I think they do need to overcome those challenges, and we need to figure out how to make that happen because they are falling behind. Kids need to have access. Kids need to learn all these media literacy skills that they need to succeed, and the parents as well need to be informed what is it that they need, because the parents know and they are clear that they want their kids to have a better future. And, in the case of the Latino community and the Spanish-speaking segment of it, they came here looking for a better future and give their kids more opportunities. And technology today is a good part of it. And I think we need to figure out how to make that happen, how to support all communities, all minorities, all people of color.
Shireen, do I see you nodding your head?
So I think in this, what folks have been alluding to is this latest wave of the Internet of Things. So moving from the consumer internet to the Internet of Things, and having technology sort of invade our physical space in a new way. And so we are really on the cusp of that. And if we don't address the equity issues now, you will leave folks behind. You will deepen inequality in the country, in my view. And so we really need to address that gap. There are certainly lots of challenges with having technology and access, but not having it really just permanently locks you out in a way that I don't think it's the kind of society we probably want to build.
Well, with that thought, serious and sober as it is, please join me in thanking our panelists.